Welcome into Lettermen Row. Welcome to the Monday after Ohio State's Idle Week, the Monday before Ohio State versus Nebraska. However you want to chop it up, it's a Monday. That means Lettermen Row is breaking down the Ohio State Buckeyes with Andy Backstrom in the middle of your screen. And the 41-year vet, Tim May, the newest member of the Hole in One Club. Tim, how exhilarating do you feel still? Like how are you feeling after the ace? I want to hear about it before we get started. We got to give you your proper due.
Yeah, real quick. I used a 6 hybrid. Which is a really great club on 167 yard par 3, of course, Crown Hill Golf Club down in Williamsport, west of Circleville, and the ball was way up in the air, came down. We had just talked about how you should play this shot. I'm going. This shot's playing exactly what we just talked about. Me and my 3 buddies I was playing with, including Gary Pettit, from Ohio State Sports Information, plunked down, rolled away because there was a swale, and never saw it roll back up. And all of a sudden, the 4 guys who were ahead of us, about to tee off on the next hole, started screaming. And walked up there. My ball was in the hole. First time ever in my life. There's no better feeling for a golfer than a hole in one. I don't know how it could be better, except we went on to also win the scramble. So there you go. And various other raffle prizes. But I'm still kind of gliding a little bit because it does uplift you. Of course, you jerk your next shot dead left. But but the great thing was, I got to tell you this anecdote. I jerked my next shot dead left, and then all of a sudden somebody said, "You didn't hit that ball you just made your hole in one with, did you?" And I went, yes, I did. And one of the other guys in our party, Joel, actually found it in the woods. So shout out to Joel. And Matt, shout out to you, man, because you're a great guy. But anyway, everybody needs one before they die, hole in one. And then some guy on the Twitterverse said, "Hey Tim, now you're only 4 behind me. I've had 5." I'm going, sit down. Right?
Well, I'm happy for you, Tim. I know Andy's happy for you. Unfortunately, this isn't a golf show, so I'm going to get us back to the football.
But I didn't mean to take that long. I hit the ball that went in the hole next.
I truly am. We are very happy for you, Tim. That's a big accomplishment for you. You practice that golf swing way too often to not have one.
Yeah.
We had to talk about it. Andy, I hope you had a good weekend. Maybe not as great of a weekend as Tim, but I'm going to throw it to you first and ask you, because this is the topic du jour for Ohio State because they didn't play on Saturday. Andy, we watched a lot of college football on Saturday. What did you learn as it pertains to Ohio State or the national title picture, or even the Big Ten title picture that you feel like you need to get off your chest this weekend?
Well, there's still 3 Big Ten teams in the top 4. I think that's notable. The SEC took another hit with Texas losing. Of course, Georgia climbs up to number 2 now. There's a lot of beating each other up in the SEC right now. I don't think that's an indictment of the conference. I think it's a strength of the conference. I think the SEC is really strong. It's been really entertaining to watch over the last month, seeing some of these teams battle it out. So I've seen some takes online about how the Big Ten is maybe superior than the SEC. I don't know if I can make that ruling just yet. I just think that right now with the way the schedule's lined up, you have these 3 Big Ten teams in the top 4. I think all 3 are really intriguing. I think we're going to learn a lot about Penn State in the next few weeks, especially with Penn State and Ohio State facing off in just a couple of weeks now. But I do think that's an interesting kind of lineup there with the top 5 within that top 25. And by the way, Indiana is now number 13 in the country, and now they got to prove it because they had this schedule that was very, very forgiving through the first 7 games of the season. And now they got some adversity with Curtis Rourke, their quarterback, the Ohio transfer, dealing with a thumb injury. They got to play Taven Jackson this week against Washington. We're going to start to see if this is a real team that can contend. And yeah, by the way, they got to play Ohio State as well.
Yeah. We always knew Indiana was eventually going to get tested. I thought the test was going to be last Saturday, and they bushwhacked Nebraska. And I really don't. I know I've been saying this all along, even on the Tim May show. I think Indiana's for real in the sense of it's legit in terms of competing. But then the way they bushwhacked Nebraska just left me dumbfounded. And so, wow, who knew that there would be 3 teams left in the Big Ten who are undefeated, and one of them would be Indiana 7 games in. But, kudos to them, and we're going to see them before Ohio State plays Michigan. They play Indiana. Are you kidding me? Who knew the toughest part of Ohio State's schedule was in front of them? Well, I guess we all knew that, didn't we? I'm sorry. I thought, and then you turn around and Iowa gets upset by Michigan State. Didn't look like it. It looked like Michigan State was the better team on Saturday night, and right on down the line. But yeah, I agree with your take, Andy, about the SEC. They're just cannibalizing themselves. But L's are still L's, baby. And if Alabama's not eliminated, and that's only got one L in it, the word eliminated. But if Alabama's not eliminated now, that means it's going to get very wild the last month or so of the SEC schedule. But I wanted to throw it out there before we move on. I mean, I truly believe Alabama with 2 losses, I think is out of the running. I mean, in my opinion, to be in the college football playoff based on who's left, including LSU, which has surprised some people. So, just your take on that before we move on, Spence. I mean, you can't have 5 or 6 teams from the same league in this new playoff and call it legit. And that's almost what you're going to have if you get everybody with 1 loss, who's sitting there with 1 loss in the SEC.
Yeah, I think LSU looks pretty good. Obviously, they're going to A&M this week. I think they've kind of taken care of business since the loss to USC at the beginning of the season, which USC is an absolute dumpster fire at this point. Just looks absolutely horrendous, and now gets to play Rutgers at home in the most important New York versus LA battle that we'll see in the rest of the month of October. Rutgers and USC on I think Saturday night. But the thing that caught me off guard on Saturday was the way that Illinois just completely handled Michigan. And I don't know how else to say it. Yesterday, I watched the 9:30 London game for the NFL, and then there was about an hour stretch between the two, the 1 o'clock games kicking and the 9:30 game ending. And so I was flipping through the channels. I saw Big Ten in 60. I turned it on. It's Illinois, Michigan. I was like, this wasn't a very good game, but let me see if I just didn't see something right from that game. So I rewatched that game. Why? I guess I'm a glutton for punishment, if you will. Or through Ohio State fans' lenses, a glutton for joy. Illinois kicked the you-know-what out of Michigan. It wasn't close. I think it was 7-7 at one point, it was 7-6, I believe. But Illinois handled Michigan. And
excuse me.
That leads into a matchup this week, which is my big thing for this week is like Illinois plays Oregon. The last time Oregon was the number 1 team in the country in 2012. They were named the number 1 team in the country. And stop me if this sounds familiar. They're named the number 1 team in the country on Monday, and 5 days later, they turned around and they lost to a top 20 team at home in Stanford to lose the number 1 ranking. Well, guess what? They were named the number 1 team in the country on Sunday, and now they play Illinois, a top 20 team at home. Depending on how that game goes, it has massive implications for Ohio State moving forward. If Michigan had beaten Illinois, we could throw Illinois to the side as like, okay, you're not in the Big Ten championship race. Ohio State doesn't play Illinois. And so Ohio State needs Illinois to lose a game at some point. And so that game, Oregon-Illinois, has huge implications now that we've seen this past weekend play out, Andy. The Big Ten race is starting to heat up, and it's fantastic to watch. It's a lot of fun right now.
I really like that Illinois defense. They're pretty opportunistic. I think they have 13 takeaways this season. And again, their 1 loss was to Penn State at Penn State. It was only a 2-touchdown defeat there. So they've been pretty legit throughout this season. Luke Altmaier is definitely one of the most improved quarterbacks in the Big Ten, has not been turning the ball over. And with a great defense, that's kind of the name of the game. So yeah, Illinois has been impressive, and Michigan has quite a problem on its hand. Again, going to a 3rd starting quarterback in Jack Tuttle, a 7th-year guy who also has turnover issues. We saw the turnover issues with Davis Warren, who threw 6 interceptions in 3 starts. Then Alex Orji came in to play quarterback. He's obviously limited in his passing ability, so they go away from him and they go to Jack Tuttle in that first half against Washington. He helps them dig out of that hole there out west, but they ultimately can't win that game, and then has more turnover issues against Illinois. And so now the question is, what do you do with the quarterback position? Do you go to a fourth quarterback there in Ann Arbor? That's certainly not the situation that Sharon Moore wanted in his first full year as head coach. And you've got some good players on offense, like Khalil Mullings has been pretty good this year for Michigan. Donovan Edwards has been a bit disappointing, but that run game at times has looked effective. Colson Loveland is certainly one of the best tight ends in the country, but there's just not the wide receiver talent. The offensive line has been too inconsistent, and the quarterback play is really head scratching, although maybe not too shocking considering the roster that Michigan entered the season with. So now I just think when I look at Michigan every week and I watch this team, I just think there's more and more pressure on Ohio State to not just beat Michigan, but drop the hammer on Michigan at home this season because, at very least, you got to win by a couple of scores to make a statement. And I think the pressure is just building on Ohio State to really deliver on that final weekend in November.
I thought this was Nebraska week. No, I'm just messing with you, Andy. Plus, Will Johnson got hurt in that game over the weekend. I mean, that's a blow to that defense. And if it wasn't for obviously, if it wasn't for the defense, the other team would have scored a lot more points, as in whenever they ran the ball. But yeah, I'm just the plummet is there, and it's legit. I mean, like we all thought it would be for Michigan this year, and I'm not surprised. They don't have a big time quarterback. I don't know what's happened to their offensive line. Evidently the conveyor belt has hit a bump in the road. Kind of reminds me of the Lucy show or the Lucille Ball show where her and Vivian Vance were trying to eat all those chocolates as they went by on the conveyor belt. They just can't do it. They can't handle it. And it's quite stunning to a certain extent, but still, as Spencer pointed out at the jump here, the Big Ten's got 3 teams in the top 4. Are you kidding me? I mean, those are legit teams. And I haven't done the math yet because I always like to wait till November, really, until I start figuring this out, how it will shape up as the top 2 if everybody keeps winning. But, of course, everybody can't keep winning because Ohio State's going to play Penn State next week. And if you follow my drift for those top 3 teams, and they've already played Oregon. So I think the top 2 I don't know if y'all agree. I think the top 2 will be decided among themselves, right, to a certain extent. At least Ohio State will play the biggest role in that. Agreed?
Yeah, it's pretty cut and dry. It's pretty simple because if Ohio State if Ohio State wins out and Oregon wins out, both those teams are going to the Big Ten championship game. If Ohio State loses to Penn State and Penn State wins out, Oregon and Penn State will go to the Big Ten championship game. So and then if Ohio State wins out, that means they also beat Indiana. They'd have all the tiebreakers.
Correct.
The only thing they could throw a wrench into this is if Illinois beats Oregon and wins out, then they would be a one loss in the Big Ten. But that's not something to sort out on October 21st because we know that these things play themselves out. Everybody's freaking out right now about the possibilities of all of this. And usually it works out where there's 2 Big Ten teams in the conference championship game that you would agree with. So we'll see what happens.
I mean, usually it was like the East versus the West or legends versus leaders. Now it's the top 2 teams.
So it does get interesting. It does get a little more muddy, and we will talk about all of that. So we just laid out what happened over the weekend. We've got all of that under control. Everybody's on the same page. What does it all mean for Ohio State, though? We'll talk about that and more on the other side of the break. Ohio State fans, let me tell you something about Rhoback Activewear. There's only one way to describe Rhoback: best fit, best feel. For those who aren't familiar with Rhoback, they are completely changing the game with their incredibly comfortable activewear. Rhoback just released their new game day collection, and it's awesome. With novel polo designs and clean hoodie and Q-zip designs for some of your favorite schools, it's definitely worth checking out. Nobody else on the market is pairing this level of custom designs with the quality of activewear. Rhoback does it better. Rhoback's everyday short are the perfect pairing as well. They are comfortable, have an elastic waistband, and great fabric that is made to have the appearance of a nice short, but the comfort of athletic shorts. Rhoback is also proudly leading the NIL charge, having signed partnerships with college stars Jalen Milroe, the quarterback at Alabama, Quinn Ewers, quarterback at Texas, former Buckeye, and Ohio State safety Caleb Downs, one of your favorite players on the team. I know it. Among others, they're becoming the go-to brand for college athletes. They've got a lot of Ohio State stuff, the Block O on some things, Ohio State logos all over those polos. Use the code Lettermen20 on rowback.com for a generous 20% off for all new customers through the end of the week. That's spelled RHOBACK.com. That's 20% off all performance polos, shorts, and more with the code Lettermen20. Go check it out. Rowback Activewear. Enter the code Lettermen20 for 20% off your first purchase from our friends over at Rowback. I've been rocking the Rowback hoodie for a long time. Come join the fun. You've been wanting Rowback. Now you've got a chance to get some Rowback and get the Ohio State logo on Rowback. Go to rowback.com, Lettermen20 for 20% off your first purchase from the folks over at Rowback. So Ohio State was off. We all know that because we didn't get to watch them on Saturday. Sad. But there was a lot of action. What does this all mean for Ohio State? So I'm going to give you, Andy, a couple different options here. Were you more impressed with Indiana? Were you more disappointed with Nebraska? Because I think that's the one that was front of mind for everybody, because Ohio State, A, plays Nebraska coming up, and B, will have to play Indiana in the future. It was a matchup between two teams with Buckeyes we'll see. So were you more impressed with Indiana or more disappointed in what you saw from Nebraska, and now you're feeling way better about the Buckeyes' chances this week?
More disappointed in Nebraska. I mean, not to take any credit away from Indiana. They played a really good game. And what Curt Cignetti has done has been super impressive. Okay. But Nebraska came in with one of the better defenses. At least that was the national perception. And Curt Cignetti talked about that post game, kind of tearing that perception down. But this defensive line for Nebraska is really good. And they just could not fit the run at all. And we know about what Indiana can do with its downfield passing, and Curtis Rourke, 2-time Big Ten Offensive Player of the Week already so far. But the running game was so effective, and especially off those RPOs, Curtis Rourke, Taven Jackson, they were making the right decisions, and Nebraska just got gashed. And they didn't really do themselves any favors because they went for it on 4th down 5 times, didn't convert on any of those. So as Matt Rule said post-game, they could have kept the score down, could have punted a few more times, but they wanted to keep attacking. Well, that didn't work. And I think for Dylan Raiola, he's had a pretty good freshman season so far, was not his best day. But again, he's been getting some pressure as well in the last few weeks, especially. And I think with Nebraska, I look at the beginning of the season and I'm looking at the schedule. They were the team I pointed to and said, hey, they could start 7-0. They could be the team that's ranked in the top 15 going into this matchup against Ohio State. Well, now it's Indiana that's the team that's 7-0. I don't think anyone had that on their bingo card. And so Nebraska coming into this game against Ohio State, I think they're vulnerable. This is kind of an opportunity for Ohio State to, again, really make a statement coming off an off week. So I'm expecting Ohio State to kind of hit the ground running off of the off week. And I think it's a good time to kind of hit Nebraska while it's down, because it's hard to bounce back from a loss like that, 56-7 on the road to a team that really, Nebraska should be able to beat in the grand scheme of things, but not this year.
Yeah, Tim, Indiana looked really good, but like Andy just said, Nebraska should not be getting beat by 49 points on the road to anybody, let alone Indiana, especially with where those programs want to be. It's year 1 for Curt Cignetti. Well, hey, it's year 2 for Matt Rule. So I don't think it should look like this. But the bottom line is now the Huskers go on the road. They have to play a top 20 team that they weren't expecting to be a top 20 team. Well, now they go back on the road the very next week to a team that they knew was going to be in the top 5. Dylan Raiola, 234 yards, 3 picks, no touchdowns. It was ugly. Their leading receiver has been a tight end all year, and Thomas Fedoni, a good player. But did your level of concern for this game against Nebraska go down after watching the Cornhuskers on Saturday, Tim?
I didn't. I'm going to be totally honest. I didn't have big level of concern for this game anyway, since it's in Ohio Stadium, since they do have as smooth and as good at times as Dylan Raiola has looked. He is a freshman quarterback who has started from day one. That was sort of his Waterloo on Saturday in Bloomington, where I'm sure they took the stadium photo since it was packed with red. No, I mean, I thought Nebraska was going to be improved this year. I think Nebraska is improved this year, but the Curt Cignetti magic act continues. And by magic, I mean, I don't know what I meant there. The Curt Cignetti reality act continued, because it is real. They are playing extremely well on both sides of the ball. I'm talking about Indiana. He did the transfer portal the right way. That, are they Michigan State of a few years ago, which was at one point undefeated, and then Ohio State bushwhacked them? Could be that team. We're going to see that, but like you said, Spencer, that's down the road. That's down the river here a little ways. But bottom line is no one expected 56-7. I don't think. Forget about Indiana being 7-0, but beating Nebraska the way it did. I'm not sure anybody had that on their parlay card. So it's kind of a double answer. I never like to take anything away from a team that gets its act together and then goes out and takes care of business. Flip side of it is, I thought Nebraska, one of the things I told Nebraska people on radio and stuff out there at the beginning of the year was I thought it was going to be much improved on defense. And it has been to a certain extent. But when you give up 3 interceptions like Dylan Raiola did and all the other things that went on in that game, an almost ineffective offense, you get what you got. And if I was Nebraska people, the level of concern going into this game in Ohio Stadium against a team, the last time we saw them got beat by 1 point by the number 1 team in the country. And we all know the mistakes Ohio State made in that game, both tactically and physically. The level of concern for Nebraska folks should be way high.
Yeah, I think you're going to get a pissed off Ohio State on Saturday. And then
I think I didn't use that graphical language. I know I said I wasn't going to interrupt you this time, but I just want to let people know I don't use that graphical language, but that's exactly what I meant.
Yeah, you're going to get an angry Ohio State on Saturday, mixed in with a Nebraska team that is, it could go one of two ways. They could be trying to pick up the pieces and come out and give a good effort, or they could, see Ohio State on the schedule after a 49-point road loss. I did think it was nice of Patrick Mahomes to do his best Dylan Raiola impression on Sunday, throwing 2 picks, having no touchdowns of his own. I thought that was nice of him. Solidarity for the two guys, because everybody does the comparisons.
Big difference in the result, though.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, the Chiefs won by 10, and Nebraska lost again by 49. Not to make jokes about it, because I do think this Nebraska team will have something to prove against Ohio State, and maybe the 49-point butt kicking is what they needed before you come to Ohio Stadium. But I don't think anybody needs that before seeing an Ohio State team that not only is coming off a loss, but then is also coming off the bye week, trying to get right. I just think that this Ohio State team, because we're going to spin it forward here and actually talk about the Buckeyes now, because that's what we do here. I think that there's a lot that this Ohio State team needs to show against Nebraska, which is another reason why I think that this could get out of hand rather quickly, because I think Ohio State, again, something to prove and a lot to show. So, Andy, what do you want to see from Ohio State this week? Like the biggest thing that you're just going to be like, okay, like I see what they did during the off week that makes you think like, okay, like they're back.
Run the dang ball. Just run it. I mean, I think the last time we saw Ohio State, they struggled to run the football in the second half. Part of that was they're playing catch-up against an Oregon team that was attacking downfield, throwing vertical, testing the Ohio State defense. But with the way that Indiana gashed Nebraska with RPOs, putting them in that kind of run-pass bind, that's what Ohio State has done best this year. Will Howard's been great with RPOs. He's been at his best on play-action pass. They need to establish the run and then make things really difficult for Nebraska defensively in this game. Just very unpredictable, but it starts with the run and with a new offensive line alignment. We're expecting Zen Mahalski at left tackle. I think getting their feet set and having some really good rushing attack is probably a good way to make him feel pretty settled in that offensive line. And, I think that's kind of the starting block for this game. And if you establish the run and you get Nebraska off kilter from the start, like you said, Spencer, this one could get away pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see what they do with the offensive line because Austin Searveld really came on in those starts for Donovan Jackson at left guard, in my opinion, became a credible performer. And, and Ryan Day hinted that was one of the options they could take is sliding Donovan Jackson out to left tackle, perhaps. We'll see how it, when they take the field on Saturday, because I'm sure we're not going to get a whole lot of insight on that. He might just step up and go, hey, here's our new offensive line. And it includes Zen Mikulski with Donovan Jackson still at left guard. But the mix and match there, and as Pete Nakos of On3 reported, over the weekend end of last week about Quinshon Judkins having the hand problem that supposedly is not going to cost him any time. he had that ball viciously ripped out of his hand at Oregon. And man, when you go back and just analyze that game, that's as key a moment as almost any other in that game, because Ohio State was determined to go out and run the ball on those guys, and they had some success. Now, people would say, well, yeah, the large majority of Travion Henderson's yards came on that one run. But you know what? Any big time running back who goes over 100 yards probably has one or two big time runs in there. You don't want to average 5 yards a carry if you can help it, because that means you're getting banged, pretty big. But I think Ohio State wants to go back out and reestablish that running game against Nebraska, just to kind of get his confidence back, even though it did rush for over 140 yards. Finally, they did have to start winging it. But I know I'm talking in circles a little bit, but there are so many things that offensively they want to get back on track with, even though they still had roughly 450 yards total offense against the number one team in the country. So I don't know where they go really, except with a new offensive line, because Josh Simmons, as Ryan Day indicated, is probably not going to play again this year. You got to get that new offensive line. New look offensive line, ever how it looks, on track, and this may be definitely the team to do it against.
Yeah, and then you flip over to the other side of the ball, which is what I want to see the most, is how confident is the secondary. These corners have to get their confidence back, whether it's Denzel Burke, obviously, whether it's Jermaine Matthews coming off the bench and getting some playing time, which I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a little bit more of that against Nebraska, or whether it's Davison Igbinosun, who quite frankly hasn't had the season that a lot of us expected him to have so far. I think the entire cornerback group just needs a good confidence game. Well, guess what? Like Dylan Raiola, for all of the faults that we've seen throughout his freshman year, he can throw the deep ball. And don't think that Nebraska is going to just, 3 yards in a cloud of dust and punt it back to Ohio State. They saw what Oregon did with the deep ball against the Buckeyes. They're going to try that. And so I think the biggest thing here, I'll get to you, Tim, is to establish some confidence in that secondary, because the Nebraska receivers aren't all that different from the Penn State receivers. I don't think Penn State has this great group of receivers. They have an elite tight end, just like Nebraska does. So these next 2 weeks are going to be confidence for the corners and defending the tight end. But the more important part of that is confidence for the corners. You cannot have Denzel Burke and these cornerbacks lacking any confidence, even after what happened at Oregon.
Here's my conundrum, which I'll try to get answered this week with some kind of deft question. Why didn't they put Jermaine Matthews in the game when it was obvious what was going on out there? You understand what I'm saying? So,
well, and
I'm just very curious about that. We talked about him, and legitimately so, about how competent he has appeared to be to us. But why not give Denzel a break or two and let him kind of sit back and regather himself? Because they definitely picked on Denzel Burke. They saw stuff about Denzel Burke that they could take advantage of, and they did it. Did they do it every play? No, but it seems like it almost, I'm sure, even to him. So, it kind of makes you scratch your head. Well, wait a minute, you were talking about how any of these guys could start any place else. Well, where were they,
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Tim. It's interesting to me that now they have iPads on the sideline too. If anything, you could let them sit for a series or two. Hey, here's an iPad. Check out what you did. Because before it was just, hey, keep your head up. We're going to get you back in there. Now you can actually see what you're doing wrong. You can see what the Oregon offense is doing that makes you, have these issues. And I do agree with you. Like there could have been that. Obviously, we're not going to completely rehash the Oregon game, but moving forward, I think there's a lesson to be learned there where now that you have those iPads on the sidelines, if you have a defender at any position who's struggling, whether that's Sonny Styles or even JT Tuimoloau or anybody. Hold on, Tim. I'm going to get to Andy too, because I can't just leave him in the middle there. I think you owe it to the rest of the team to pull the guy, let him watch the iPad for a little bit now that you've got him on the sideline, and regather himself and see what's going on down there, Andy.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Denzel Burke's gotten his share of blame for this game and certainly did not play well at all. Probably the worst game of his career, definitely the worst quarter of his career in the second quarter. That's where those deep balls happened. But look, the defensive line also didn't really come to play as much as it should have. And I was looking at the stats. Jack Sawyer only has 2.5 sacks this year. He had 3 sacks in the Cotton Bowl alone. And look, I know sacks aren't the only stat. I've been someone that's talked about that a lot over the last year and a half. And Jack Sawyer's pressures are up overall. At least he's trending that way. Projection as you chart out the rest of the season. But at the end of the day, you need to make those plays. You need to create havoc. You need to get to the quarterback and finish plays. Both he and JT Tuimoloau need to do more for a Nebraska offensive line that has at times been a bit porous with a freshman quarterback in Dylan Raiola, who is really great at times and other times looks like a freshman. This is an opportunity to step up on the defensive line, create the havoc, not just get pressure, but actually sack the quarterback. Because if he does have time, as Spencer was saying, he can throw the deep ball, but also, yeah, the receivers might not be the big names that you're used to with Oregon, but they've got some big guys out there.
Oh, yeah.
Jamal Banks, 6'4", Isaiah Nair, 6'4", and if you throw the ball deep and give those guys a chance, especially with some defensive backs that have looked vulnerable at points this season for Ohio State, you might have some jump balls that are won by Nebraska, and that changes the game. So it's all about the marriage between the pass rush and the coverage in the defensive backfield. And yes, the defensive backs have not been at the BIA standard, but also the defensive line needs to get more pressure and they need to finish plays because at this point in the season, JT Tuimoloau has 3 sacks, Jack Sawyer has 2.5 sacks, and I don't think anyone can be happy with that output right now.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's funny because Ryan Day didn't give mixed messages. He's kind of like gave hints, during his off week about they were looking at a lot of things, including schematically, they were looking at some things, which is an interesting word for him to use. And, I think he meant on both sides of the ball, but I would think he meant on both sides of the ball, not just offense. And because we talk about it, I mean, boy, a half step, just a half step off. But, that half step's been there for a long time, I mean, how long you going to keep hearing that? Well, he had pressure. Well, when you've got a cool customer at quarterback like Dylan Gabriel is, I think Dylan Gabriel plays better when the game's on the line. And that's not taking anything from Will Howard, because Will Howard played well in that game, which was, you've got the lead now, you've got the lead. No, I've got the lead. It was a great game to watch, like we talked about last week, if you didn't have a rooting interest in it. And but the bottom line is the plays weren't made on either side of the ball when they needed to be made. And defensively, yeah, they did stop them finally at the 1 or 2 yard line and forced a field goal at the end. They still Oregon still had the ball and still scored and basically went ahead with that score, that field goal. And then Ohio State couldn't make the play at the end of the game. We can debate, what happened in the last 20 some odd seconds, but the bottom line is they didn't get it done. And they all know that they had the ball with a chance to win the game. So schematically, but I'm going back to the defensive side, I don't think there's anything wrong with just playing kind of a base defense and getting after somebody, especially when you got a Caleb Downs roaming around who can roam around on the backside of the defense and possibly be the human eraser. Lathan Ransom, whether he's been banged up or not, we're going to find out. But the bottom line is you got 2 of the best safeties in the country. Play them as safeties, not quasi linebackers. That would be my only rant. And then you go from there. Let them do their natural thing, which is break on the ball and see the forest for the trees and all those other cliche things. But give help over the top. Don't let one play change the game like the Evans deep ball did when he ran past Denzel Burke when they did that, whatever that weird blitz was. It's just crazy to think about. You don't have to be that clever, right? Just let guys play. But yes, y'all are both right. You got to get some sacks, man. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Listen, I've been doing this long enough now where you can fall back on past games. I remember the 2020 Indiana game that was 42-35. It was 35-7. Wasn't even close. And then Indiana came storming back with Michael Penix and a couple of good receivers. Coming out of that game, Well, they were really close to sacks. They were pressuring the quarterback, but he was just making good throws under pressure. It was really, they were really close. Every single game since then, I swear, it's been, well, they were really close to sacks, but they just weren't close. Well, if you have a 4 or 5 year sample size that tells you that you're close to sacks but not getting sacks, you're not doing enough. And so I think that's one of the big things that this team needs to address is how to get to the quarterback. It's not to put pressure on the quarterback. It's get to the quarterback and bring him to the ground when he still possesses the football. I think that is way more important than pressure. And so at some point, the rubber has to meet the road here. And you have to say, why are we getting pressure and not sacks? And why can't we get sacks?
Yeah. Well, the other thing, with Dylan Gabriel, you had to contain him too. I mean, I understand all of the different things there. And then, of course, they didn't contain him on a 27-yard boot keeper for a touchdown, which was huge in that game. I keep going, that was a huge touchdown, man. You've got him right where you want him to a certain extent, and then boom, he just tucks it and goes. So there are all kinds of things you have to keep in mind here when you start pleading for sacks. But the reason you're pleading is you got two guys that were so ballyhooed at the ends. You got two other guys playing behind them that are ballyhooed. You've got Edric Houston. I mean, right on down the line, a freshman guy who we've hardly seen anything of. You've got Tyleek Williams in there and Ty Hamilton. I don't think it's I don't think it's wrong to say Ohio State fans expected more from that defensive front in a big game, because the other games leading up to this game, I'm talking about leading up to the Oregon game. Who cares, right? Yeah. But this was one where you needed plays made by all concerned, and you didn't necessarily get it.
Andy, anything before we get out of here?
Yeah, look, guys, Mitchell Melton has played 80 defensive snaps this season. He has 2 sacks. And then you've got Jack Sawyer, who's played 230 defensive snaps. He's got 2.5 sacks. And I'm not trying to compare guys. I'm just trying to say that, as we just said, they need more production from their best players on defense. That's at cornerback with Denzel Burke and to a certain extent Davison Igbinosun. That's a defensive end with JT Tuimoloau, as well as Jack Sawyer. That's really across the board. And I think what I've noticed is when this defense has its back against the wall, it plays its best. Look at last year, how many times it came through when they needed a play to keep them in the game, whether it was against Maryland with the Josh Proctor interception, whether it was against Rutgers with, again, Josh Proctor making a good play, but also Jordan Hancock taking interception back to the house, whether it was against Missouri with Jack Sawyer stepping up and keeping the team. How many times do we see this defense deliver and win the game, or at least keep them in the game for Ohio State? This year, at times the defense has been that dominant, but it feels like it needs that sense of urgency again. It's almost like last year they knew the offense wasn't what it normally was at Ohio State, so they elevated their level of play. And we see this at all levels of football. Defenses will do that, especially the best defenses. Well, they need the same level of urgency with an offense that's improved and explosive, because they need to pair that together. And right now it just feels like whether it's the slow starts to games or just breaking down, and not saying they're complacent, but they certainly don't seem to have the same level of amp and urgency as they did at times last year. They need to find that even with an offense that's delivering more.
Yep.
Yeah. How about CJ Hicks off the edge? For example, Mitchell. I mean, all these things we heard about in preseason that could happen, we saw in the spring that could happen. And like you just talked about, Mitchell Melton, you got to see more of Mitchell Melton. I mean, that's just my take. Play a lot of guys and see what happens. And will this be a false harbinger this week? Because obviously Nebraska got beat by Indiana 56-7 last week.
They sure did, Tim. If you haven't noticed, we'd like to talk about the Buckeyes. That's why we just went almost 40 minutes when Ohio State didn't even play a game. But that's what we do at LettermenRow.com. That's what we do on the Lettermen Row YouTube channel. If you like what you see here, go right under this video, hit like on the video. That helps us out a lot. Then subscribe to the YouTube channel. Andy Backstrom in the middle of the screen. Tim May, the 41-year vet and newly minted member of the Ace Club. And then there's just me, Spencer Holbrook. We're going to be in the Woody on Tuesday talking to Ryan Day for the first time since we had that little tent conversation with him on last Saturday night at Austin Stadium when the cheers were around them. The Buckeyes were reeling after a loss. Now they've had a few days to recover and get on to the second half of the season. Lettermen Row will be there every step of the way with those Buckeyes that you know and you love. Again, that's Tim on the other side, Andy in the middle, and me, Spencer Holbrook. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you guys on Tuesday in the Woody after we hear from Ryan Day and the Buckeyes.